Over the last couple weeks, you and I have discussed a main topic. What is LSU going to go do at tight ends coach now that Slade Nagel is taking over as the OC for the Houston Cougars and Willie Fritz? There have been a lot of things that we have discussed in the area that I would go in. I'm not going to say that I didn't have some sourcing behind it, and I'm not going to say that I did not have some people chirping in my ear behind it in reference when it came to Alex Atkins. But it remains the same that I think that LSU and Brian Kelly, for what it's worth, 100% made the right move in hiring Alex Atkins. You have got to be better in the running game. The reason that the title of this episode was Home Run Hire ? In reference to Alex Atkins was because I think that having an established running game, something that you have not had in the 3 years that since Brian Kelly has been here, could benefit you in such a massive light. Now, 2022, you had one, but you did not have it consistently over the last 2 seasons. You have to bring in a guy that literally knows what he's doing there from a run game standpoint, from an offensive line and tight end standpoint, when it comes to running the football. Now, I do think Alex Atkins, for what it's worth, is arguably and probably going to get some assistance, help, whatever, when it comes to route running and things when it comes to the tight end room. I'm not saying that he can't do it in and of itself right now. But what I do know is it won't be the first time that Alex Atkins, number one, has been in the room. Number two, has directed what he needed to do at tight ends. Number three, is recruited at a high level at tight end. You should remember, because in 2023, he recruited that position group in the portal and absolutely dominated you from that position. What Alex Atkins brings is a knowledge and consistency of what you want to do in the running game. Look, Alex has had multiple stops in his career. He's actually been at Tulane, but he started off his coaching career at Tennessee Martin, where he played as the tight ends coach in 2008. Well, Blake, that's a long time ago. And you're right, it is a long time ago. But guys, when I was graduating high school, coming up close to over 15 years now, when I was graduating high school, this man was literally, because I graduated in 2008, I probably was my first semester at Southeastern. But when this man in 2008 was a position coach at Tennessee Martin, he was at tight ends. He would continue to move up and down the ranks as an offensive coordinator, O-line coach, before he became the assistant head coach, run game coordinator, and offensive line coach at Tulane. This is also not the first time that Alex Atkins has been in a position where he's been over the run game principles and what you're trying to do and establish in the running game. I mean, he's been an offensive coordinator, so of course he's been able to do that. But in this specific role, you're not hiring a guy that has not been in this position and that has not been, or that this will not be new to him. It's not going to be new to him. You have got to get all the help that you can on specifically what you need to do in the running game. I know it's exhausting. I know you've heard me talk about it a lot. But one thing is for certain. If you are not, from a coaching perspective, outside of your head coach, going to be there or not have a quarterback that is as special as Jaden Daniels to run the football, you are going to be in trouble and you're not going to get where you want to go. Harlan Berry, Caden Durham, God bless if Caleb Jackson gets moving. You are not going to get where you need to go. You have got to be better there. I'm sure and this is key, I'm sure as details and things continue to come out about this Alex Atkins hire, per Wilson Alexander, if you're just watching the clip and you didn't hear the beginning of the show, per Wilson Alexander, this deal being finalized, this is a massive hire the way that I see it. You have a guy in Joe Sloan who comes from a system that is literally been perfected at times, even at Louisiana Tech when they were there, of what you want to do in the passing game. Bringing in somebody whose biggest strength is knowing what to need to do in the running game is a massive plus. There is a caveat that some people threw in my direction today that I just don't really care about at this current moment because of how big of a need that you have in the running game. And that was that there was a show cause placed on Alex Atkins when he was at Florida State because of improper contact in recruiting. I mean, so he's going to get hit for improper contact to a player, and we're just going to act like that he's the only one doing it. It was clear to everyone with a pulse that when Alex Atkins was not at Florida State, in which he served a suspension this past year, offensively, they sucked. Mike Norvell, let's just call it what it is, even post Alex Atkins, got tremendously worse from an offensive play calling standpoint. Norvell, which we know that Alex Atkins coming from Florida State as the OC, because he was the one that went out and got DJ Uiagalelei. He tried to mold the offense the way that he saw fit, and he missed. So, Alex Atkins, being the former Florida State offensive coordinator, had a lot of great moments. You know, I tweeted this today. In 2022, as a team, Florida State averaged 213 yards on the ground. The following year, when they were 13-1, before Jordan Travis got hurt, they're averaging around 160 to 170 yards on the ground per game. It's what you need to be able to be not only to win the SEC, but just stay highly more competitive in the SEC. You got to line up and run the football. We have talked about this for weeks. I don't think that there's a better addition that you could have for tight end and what your current need is offensively than Alex Atkins. He checks all the boxes. Really good recruiter. Check. By the way, beat you for Solomon Thomas, not once but twice. You get Solomon Thomas now, but here comes Alex Atkins. Really, really good in the play calling of what he does in the running game. You should remember, he dominated you twice. Now, if they're going to go full on Alex Atkins and him being involved in the running game, you can expect a lot of counter run. We will have a lot of time to talk about that, especially during spring. But he checks every single box that you need. Now, I don't want to even call it concern. The only question that I have is that you have multiple tight ends in that room that are really, really good or have the potential of being very, very good in the passing game. I'm not so sure what you have to do to elevate them. I think they'll continue to get better. Bauer Sharp, Donovan Green, and clearly Trey Green. All three guys have a very large, very, very large understanding and wingspan and all of the things that you need, acceleration, jump, whatever. They are really good when they got the football in their hands. They all have massive upside. The question had always been to me, when you get to that room, is there someone there that can help them formulate being on the end line of scrimmage? That was a massive struggle for you a year ago. Slay Nagel, for what it's worth, being that position coach, guys did not develop on the end line of scrimmage other than Mason Taylor, who's a different situation. But when you bring in Trey Green, when you're bringing in these other guys, you would go in with 12 personnel with Kamori and Pimpton, and it would not help you. It would not help you at all. Now you're bringing a former OC from Florida State, tight end coach, O-line coach, run game coordinator that can help them and develop them at that position. I don't like using the word home run hire. I think we have to see how that plays out. But when it comes down to a box being checked on everything that you need, there's not anybody else there that I think that you could have gone and gotten. Now, he's not the only one that we talked about. The other person that we didn't bring up his name, but the other thing that we talked about for LSU and coaching staff was what they're going to do in the analyst role. Lance Guidry was announced last night. We talked about it for a very small bit on the live show. But if we're being honest about where things stand, from a staff perspective, you are knocking it out of the park, in my humble opinion. I don't like saying that because normally when that happens, it doesn't go the way that you think. But I look at the defensive staff with you bringing in Lance Guidry, and I'm like, hey, man, you have Kevin Peoples, Bo Davis, Blake Baker, Corey Raymond, Jake Olson, and Lance Guidry. From a staff perspective, I would trust your defensive staff more than anybody. Then I look at offense. There are some questions that they have to answer. 100% has got to answer. I've seen Cortez Hankton develop wide receivers. I see the development of how Kyron Lacey progressed, how Aaron Anderson progressed. Quite frankly, I saw how BTJ progressed. I think as a staff, you're knocking it out of the park. But you were warned that this could be happening. You were warned that these moves could be happening, even when it came to Lance Guidry. Don't take it from me. Actually, probably you should take it from me. This was us a week ago today. Brian Kelly's had some shakeups in the recruiting department, and some different things have changed along and will continue to change along in there from what I hear. I think that Brian Kelly's role right now, regardless, and I do think that some of these things are going to be announced relatively within the week. I do think that Brian Kelly has a very interesting decision to make here. I think that these analysts and these guys that are off-field roles, quote unquote, are bigger now than they have ever been. These off-field analysts are non-true position coaches, now can be at practice coaching players throughout the practice. Any coaching staff that you will talk to around the country will tell you that the analysts that are around them are a big thing, are a big factor in the success of what they have. We've heard Steve Sarkisian talk about it. We've heard Lane Kiffin talk about it. We've heard Jim Harbaugh talk about it. Clearly, we've heard him talk about it. We've heard Urban Meyer, Ryan Day, Brian Kelly, all of the Kirby Smart, all of these elite college football coaches have all said one thing about the new direction of this analyst role. I do think that there are some ex-coordinators that are out there that LSU has talked to that could potentially come here. But it's basically I think that Nick Saban was a little ahead of his time in doing this, but now it's even more of a magnified scale of being able to go out and get analysts who can really help your program and team. Never been a bigger deal for college athletics and college coaching to have one of these analyst roles and fill them with the right people than it is right now. If I'm Blake Baker, I'm going after other coordinators that have the same philosophies that I do. Or Brian Kelly, regardless if he said it on the podium or not, that his actions led to that he had to bring out and bust out a play sheet and start going through and helping with play calling. Tendencies is what he called it. Helping with tendencies. Basically, which translates to he's helping in the running game. First and foremost, regardless of who LSU hires at tight ends coach, the number one thing that they got to do is go and get a guy that understands the run game better than anybody on that staff outside of Brian Kelly. It's the number one move that I'm making. Even if you want to have a run game coordinator that is calling plays in the running game, that's fine with me. I really don't care. We've already seen that have to happen, and it started with Florida literally 7-8 weeks ago. It needs to continue. Who would you hire as a tight ends coach? Someone that can call plays running the football, or someone who has a vast knowledge of the running game and will take over it right now, because I don't think you're good enough. Now, I said this last week, and I'm going to warn you again because I've had a whole weekend to think about it. 104th in the running game is not being negative. It's realistic. And if you're not realistically understanding that for yourself, that you're not going to win shit until you get that better, it's not on me. But the bottom line remains, I'm going a guy like Alex Atkins. I'm throwing a name out there. I think if you did hire a guy like Alex Atkins, it'd be a home run. That was a week ago today. So within the week, you have Lance Guidry. You're bringing him in. You have Alex Atkins, per Wilson Alexander again, that deal being finalized. I don't think that you could have done better based off of the needs of your team than what Brian Kelly has done in these two additions. It starts getting to a place where you start asking the questions of just how good is this staff, just how good is this personnel, and what is your realistic expectations for this? Now, I had somebody today in media, Cole Thompson, brought this to my attention. Like, hey, Blake, now when you're making these moves, you have two coordinators that we talked about in the clip just then, but you have two coordinators, ex-coordinators that you're bringing in, one for an analyst role and another for a tight end position coach, which quite honestly is not going to be equal and is clearly not the same. You're running out of excuses. The staff is what the staff is. I would go to war and have a debate with anybody at just how good this staff is and what the potential could be. Personnel-wise, I think that's a different thing and a different topic and a different situation. But the minds of play calling, the minds of what you need to do to win in this league, you are hiring those dudes. I think Alex Atkins, as an example, coming in is a massive deal. One other thing, let's talk about what Alex Atkins does and how you would notice if he's massively involved. Guys, you're going to run counter. You're going to run power counter. You're going to do so many different things to get offensive linemen out in space, and you're going to run the football at an effective rate. In 2022, Florida State ran the ball 40 times a game. Feed that in my veins. Now, I do not believe under Joe Sloan fully that you are going to do that. But a former offensive line guy, a former coordinator that will line up and run the ball to win games and be good and beat you, as an example, it's what they're doing, and it's what he did. I love the move, man. I 1,000% love the move. I really don't know of another avenue that would have been realistic for Brian Kelly to have gone in other than this one that I would have liked more. Alex Atkins is a very good, staunch and really good recruiter. He is a guy that, let's just say hypothetically, Joe Sloan's name was brought up in a lot of, I think, the ECU job and others. If you do move on or he moves on, there's a guy right there in Alex Atkins that you could promote. I brought up in the clip that you just showed, Saban being a little bit before his time. Guys, the philosophy is now just on another level of what you can do. Blake Tulane job opens up for whatever reason. Blake Baker moves on. He wants to go back home to Tulane. He wants to take over, wants to become a head coach. Lance Guidry is there. This is how programs win. It's how programs win. The first time that Texas made a playoff, the lead assistant is Steve Sarkisian, Gary Patterson, the former TCU coach. Another set of eyes that can lean in on how a coordinator sees it. That could be Alex Atkins to Joe Sloan, and it certainly is going to be what Lance Guidry is to Blake Baker. One thing is for sure, too, that I need to mention. There have been, and you're going to see some Florida State fans talking ill about Alex Atkins. I love college football. There are some fan bases that can become unhinged. Florida State is one of them. We are one of them, by the way. Don't think that we're not. We can be one of them. They will throw the Alex Atkins O-line development problem in your face. It's not all on him. Mike Norvell had a specific way of how he wanted to go and build his team. It did not work. They wanted to go portal. They did not want to develop through high school. Quite frankly, Alex Atkins was not on the boat on that, as we've seen. You got to dominate through high school recruiting and have that as your base. Recruiting, run game guy that can teach a tight end room that really needs assistance and development on the end line of scrimmage and blocking. Check, check, check. I am intrigued to see what happens from a pass game standpoint. And I don't know if Alex Atkins needs that assistance from anyone, being and seeing how good Florida State had been and was at that in that position group and at tight end. Tip of the cap to Brian Kelly. Tip of the cap. I think it's absolutely astronomical what you've pulled off. Last night, I felt as if this move would not get finalized. There were other teams, there were other places that wanted Alex Atkins and came heavy after him. You held them off, and you did what LSU does do. LSU doesn't bend the knee to anybody. You're like Jon Snow when you're going into the Battle of the Bastards. We don't bend the knee to anybody. NFL comes calling the coaches. No. Unless you want to go, no. We're going to do what we need to do to win championships and win games. And that's what you did. I will be open and honest with you. Last night when we spoke, I did not feel that was going to happen. I felt from some things that I had heard that things could go sideways quickly. But LSU and Brian Kelly and Scott Woolward and company stood up and made a stand. And for that, welcome to the party, pal. Welcome to the party. I was asked today, kind of a little off topic, but not really. I was asked a little bit today about Brian Kelly and some of these moves that he's made. Since the Bryce Underwood debacle, I've seen a different, not even on the road in recruiting. We talked about that last week too, or on Monday too, I think. I've seen a difference in how LSU perceives themselves, number one, their attention to detail, number two, how they're going about adding talent, number three, and just the overall mentality of what they're going to do. You want to come in here and take somebody of ours? You want to come in here and take one of our recruits? STTDB. I don't know what has been the shift in the mentality, but it certainly has happened. Missing will do that. The last time that I had that feeling, the last time of, hey, man, we're going to go out there and act like we're LSU because we are, was 2017, 2018-ish, when LSU misses out on Devonta Smith. They miss out on Ismail Sobcher. One of them won a Heisman. The other one, I have no idea what he's doing. But you remember those processes. And, oh, man, here we go. This isn't any good. It actually turned out to be pretty damn good. It is ironic that normally and historically when LSU misses, things start to turn. But it is very familiar. Another thing. You just hired two coordinators, an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator from the ACC. In week one, you play Clemson. Talk about wanting to get that monkey off your back. I don't know if there's any coaches that were ex-coordinators that you could have gotten that would have known more about Clemson than Alex Atkins as an opponent than Alex Atkins and Lance Guidry. I don't know if they exist, that you relatively and realistically could have gotten. I don't think that they exist. They have a head start on what Clemson wants to do, personnel, everything. You went in the ACC and took two coordinators. Both of them were let go, and I understand that. But talk about going into environment. Talk about having knowledge to give to your head coach on what to expect and what to do, there is no more than that. All right, so we talked a lot about Alex Atkins. Just very quickly, I want to say this before we move to Lance Guidry very quickly. In 2008, Alex Atkins did coach the tight ends at Tennessee Martin. In 2016 through 2018, was the running game coordinator at Tulane, along with being the assistant head coach and the offensive line coach and the recruiting coordinator. In 2020 to 2021, he took over as the offensive line coach at Florida State. From 2022 to 2024, he was promoted as the Florida State offensive coordinator the years that they had their biggest success. So that is a little bit to note about Alex Atkins and his resume. I want to move to Lance Guidry because Carter and I talked about Lance a little bit yesterday when the news was breaking. I need to stop drinking a bottle of water. All those microplastics. We played the clip earlier in reference to me saying that LSU was going after ex-coordinators. Let me tell you some things that in that process and even now I think that LSU could do, has the potential to do, and something that would be very good, in my humble opinion, of what they should do. Lance Guidry is a safeties coach through and through. It's the position that he's coached the most. Now, he's been over an entire DB room before. He's a DB guy. But if you cut him open and you ask him, what position group do you want to coach, it's more than likely going to be safety. You have a lot of new safeties now. You have young safeties that are in that room. You have Deshaun Spears. You have Tamarcus Cooley that comes in from the portal. And quite frankly, I still do not believe that you're done at that position when it comes to the spring portal window. I don't. There are a lot of teams in the country that are looking for safeties. I think that there is a potential. I don't know if this will happen, but I do think that there is a potential for LSU to, and not just only LSU, but for last year's spring portal window of defensive tackles, that being safety this go around, because so many teams are looking for safeties. If you throw your hat in that arena, you better be willing to go out and spend the money. Don't think that you can get in that arena when everybody's going to throw that money around and think that they're not going to outspend you. Lance Guidry has a very interesting situation here being an analyst. I don't even know if I want to even continue to formulate him as an analyst, if I'm being honest. I think calling him an analyst is quite honestly bullshit, because now with the rule of analysts being able to coach at practice and guys having headsets and analysts having headsets, are we really going to just call them analysts? Now, I still think that Jake Olson, for what it's worth, is still going to be over the duties of the safety room. What happens with Harold Perkins? We kind of mentioned it last night, but didn't go into great detail. What happens with Harold Perkins? I humbly believe that he moves out to Star, that Star role that Major Burns played in. And I think that you have a guy that, number one, everybody on that staff really likes in Lance Guidry, that can help mold, develop a guy that is struggling to find what his calling of a position is. Again, I just want to make a very big if, because I do not know what LSU is going to do with Perk. I don't. I have a very formulated hypothesis of what I think they're going to do, but let's just say humbly that they move him to Star. I am taking Lance Guidry, who has been known in his career from lower schools to be a very high developmental coach. I am taking him with Harold Perkins and saying, make him, not let me do that because it'll sound political. Make Perk into your image of the defense that we're trying to call. Because I think that Lance Guidry has a very massive understanding of what Blake Baker wants to do. Again, Blake Baker, and I'll just say it like this. Sources, I guess. Blake Baker is highly involved in this Lance Guidry move. He's highly involved in it. It does not happen without him. I know Brian Kelly is going to ultimately be the decision maker of what goes down. This does not happen without Blake Baker's sign of approval. You go to Lance and you say, listen, big dog, be with Harold 24/7. I have spoken to multiple people in the last 24 to 48 hours, and even in the beginning of last week when we kind of have hinted at this about going after coordinators that can help Blake Baker in his mold and image. The reason I brought that up then, and the reason I'm going to say this now is you have a freak of nature in Harold Perkins. You have a guy that this time a year from now could be at the Reese's Senior Bowl, and we're saying, bro, Harold Perkins was an All-American. Blake Baker and Jake Olson and Lance Guidry had a big deal to do with this. Because everybody on that staff is going to really enjoy Lance Guidry. He's a ball dude. He is a ball knower. All Lance Guidry cares about is ball. Now, from a Miami's perspective, if you want to go that route, I think that there was other issues involved with Lance Guidry at Miami. They gave out too many explosive plays. I think the personnel, quite frankly, that some he did not bring in. A lot of the guys that he had were not dudes that he brought in, just so we're frank. They did not know what they needed to do. It's a lot like you. But knowing the history of what has happened with Lance Guidry, former head coach at Magnesia State, former DC at Southeastern, former DC at Marshall, former DC at Miami, I have full confidence that if you give him Harold Perkins at Star, we could see a drastic change in the production of what we want Harold to be. Blake Baker sent more nickel because from, I guess, a PFF perspective, Major Burns was a nickel. Nobody in the SEC sent more pressure from that nickel, big linebacker, star role more than you did. Nobody. Nobody did. So you're putting Harold Perkins in a role where now when he's blitzing from that star, nickel, whatever you want to call it, I don't care what you call it. Call it outright dog shit for all I care. But from that role, Harold's now going to be lined up with, historically, when we've seen guys use this kind of defense and try to block those positions, either running backs are going to do it, fullbacks, tight ends. The likely chance of Harold Perkins rushing the passer or blitzing and being one-on-one with a tackle is not going to be necessarily something that happens often unless an offense schemes for it to be the way that happens. So I feel very confident in what Harold can do there, along with the development of Lance Guidry. I brought up Andre Sam last night. Andre Sam was a safety that he developed. Guys, a guy that probably was not ready to be, or probably was not the level of standard of what you wanted safety. But quite honestly, he was the best one that you had. And that was a Lance Guidry guy. He could ultimately take over at safety. And there will not be, I promise you this, there will not be a better DB coaching staff in the country better than Corey Raymond and Lance Guidry. It will not exist. It does not exist. And another thing about Lance, too, my man can recruit. And he's not going to necessarily be over that, but he can if you need him to. So if you got to move on from Jake Olson in any way, you have somebody there that can take over right then and there. I think it's phenomenal.